galaxy had never known peace, not truly, but there had always been an unspoken balance, a tenuous equilibrium maintained by treaties, trade, and the understanding that mutual destruction served no one. That balance shattered the day the Rhynak Dominion declared war on the Ysari Federation. What began as a minor conflict over a disputed mining colony on the edge of the galactic rim quickly escalated into a war of catastrophic proportions. The Ysari retaliated, bringing in their allies, the Kalos Syndicate, a shadowy network of mercenaries and assassins. In response, the Rhynak reached out to the Kravi Imperium, a militaristic empire with fleets of dreadnoughts and soldiers bred for war. Lines were drawn, alliances solidified, and soon the galaxy was divided. The conflict spread like wildfire, igniting dormant tensions and dragging even the most neutral civilizations into the fray. Planets were razed, their surfaces turned to glass by orbital bombardments. Trade routes collapsed, sending entire economies into freefall. Refugees poured into star systems already teetering on the brink of collapse. It wasn't just war, it was the unraveling of the very fabric of galactic society. Amidst this chaos, a peculiar anomaly began to emerge. The Great Galactic Network, a system of communication that spanned the known universe, was flooded with news of battles, pleas for assistance, and frantic negotiations. Every species was represented in the cacophony of noise, from the booming proclamations of the Rhynak to the cryptic, fragmented messages of the insectoid Kilori. But one voice was missing: humanity. Earth had been a relative newcomer to the galactic stage. They were small compared to the titanic empires dominating the stars, but they were loud. Humans were known for their ceaseless curiosity, their knack for innovation, and their seemingly boundless energy. They were traders, explorers, diplomats, always involved in some way. Their broadcasts filled the network with everything from classical music to political debates to bizarre entertainment programs that no one else could fully understand. Humanity was never content to stay silent. But then they did. At first, no one noticed. The galaxy was far too preoccupied with its own destruction to pay attention to a minor species on the outskirts of the war. But as the months turned to years, whispers began to spread. Human trade convoys stopped appearing. Diplomatic envoys disappeared. Their colonies, once bustling with activity, went dark. Even Earth itself, the cradle of humanity, ceased all contact. There was no warning, no announcement. One day they were there, and the next they were gone. It was as though humanity had evaporated, leaving behind only empty worlds and unanswered questions. The few who dared to approach Earth found nothing unusual, at least nothing they could see. The planet's surface appeared untouched, its cities standing intact but eerily still. Orbital scans detected power grids still functioning, but no movement, no signs of life. Some speculated that humanity had been destroyed, caught in the crossfire of the war. Others believed they had abandoned their homeworld, fleeing to some hidden sanctuary deep in uncharted space. A few even suggested that they had ascended to some higher plane of existence, leaving the galaxy behind. But one thing was clear: humanity's silence was deliberate. It wasn't the absence of a fallen civilization. It was the quiet of a predator lying in wait. And in the midst of the galaxy's chaos, that silence was far louder than any war cry. When I first received my assignment to investigate Earth's silence, I thought it was a joke. The Zillan press agency I worked for rarely concerned itself with anything so trivial as the affairs of a minor species like humans. But with the galactic war dragging on and every story consumed by the endless cycle of battles and destruction, perhaps they saw an opportunity. The silence of humanity had become a topic of morbid curiosity, a ghost story whispered among the galactic elite. So when my editor handed me the assignment, I accepted, more out of boredom than anything else. How could one species possibly vanish from the galactic stage in the midst of all this chaos? Getting to Earth wasn't easy. Travel across war-torn space lanes was dangerous, and I had to hitch rides on smuggler vessels and outdated transports to avoid the main galactic battlefronts. Along the way, I encountered others who had heard the stories. Pilots, merchants, refugees. They all spoke of Earth like it was some haunted place, a cursed world best left alone. Humans were always unpredictable, one Usari merchant said, shaking their luminescent head. But this is different. It's as if they're daring the galaxy to look for them. When I finally arrived in the Sol system, the first thing I noticed was how unremarkable it seemed. Earth's defenses were minimal by galactic standards. No orbital fleet, no planetary shield, no signs of military activity. It was almost laughable. This was the species that had been making the galaxy uneasy? A planet so undefended it could be conquered by a single Rhynac cruiser? But as my ship approached the surface, a strange unease began to creep over me. From orbit, Earth looked alive, its blue oceans and green continents teeming with the vibrant colors of life. Yet, something was wrong. My scans detected no significant energy signatures beyond the baseline power grids. No ships moved through the atmosphere. No signals transmitted from the surface. It was as though the entire planet was in stasis, frozen in time. I landed in what humans called New York City, once a bustling metropolis known across the galaxy for its chaos and energy. Now it was a graveyard. Skyscrapers still stood tall, their windows reflecting the pale sunlight, but there were no people. Vehicles were parked haphazardly in the streets as though their drivers had abandoned them in the middle of a busy day. Signs of life were everywhere, but life itself was nowhere to be found. At first, I thought I'd arrived too late, that some cataclysmic event had wiped out humanity while the galaxy was too distracted to notice. But as I wandered deeper into the city, I began to notice details that didn't fit. The power was still on, lighting the streets and buildings. Automated systems continued to operate, maintaining infrastructure that no one seemed to be using. In one building, I found a coffee machine still brewing a pot, the liquid long gone cold. It was as if everyone had simply walked away, leaving their lives mid. The silence was oppressive. On most inhabited worlds, even the quietest places were filled with the hum of life. Birds, insects, distant machinery. Here there was nothing. It wasn't the silence of death. It was the silence of absence. Humanity hadn't died. They had left. But where? I combed through their remnants. Datapads, archives, anything I could access. What little I found offered no answers. It was as though humanity had meticulously erased themselves, leaving only the shell of their civilization behind. But one discovery changed everything. Buried within their last transmitted broadcast was a single cryptic message. "We are watching. Do not come." It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. And for the first time in my career, I began to feel real fear. I should have left then and there, but I couldn't. Something about Earth pulled me deeper, like an unseen hand guiding my steps. I had to know the truth, no matter the cost. I spent days combing through the remnants of Earth's abandoned cities, searching for answers. The deeper I delved, the more questions I unearthed. Humanity hadn't just disappeared. They had erased their presence with surgical precision. There were no bodies, no signs of a mass exodus, no evidence of disease, war, or environmental collapse. It was as if they had vanished willingly, as if they had planned for this. But why? And more importantly, how? The cryptic message in their final broadcast, "We are watching, do not come," haunted me. It wasn't a plea for help or an attempt to explain their absence. It was a warning, direct and deliberate. Yet humanity had always been a species that thrived on connection, on communication. They weren't known for secrecy or silence. What could possibly drive them to send a message like that and then retreat into obscurity? In my search for answers, I began to tap into Earth's digital archives. what they once called the Internet. The service-level data was unhelpful. Entertainment programs, historical records, and seemingly endless streams of human creativity. But as I dug deeper, I uncovered fragments of encrypted files and hidden networks. It was here, in the dark corners of their abandoned systems, that I found the threads of a mystery far greater than I had imagined. The humans had a term for it: the Great Silence. The phrase appeared over and over in forums, private communications, and classified documents. At first, it was mentioned as a theoretical event, a concept debated by their scientists and philosophers. But as I pieced together the timeline, it became clear that the Great Silence wasn't just an idea, it was a plan. I found scattered references to vast construction projects, hidden from public view and shielded from galactic detection. Bunkers, they called them, though the scale of what they were building seemed to far exceed anything that could be justified by normal defensive measures. There were rumors of underground cities, automated factories, and research facilities capable of operating in total isolation. But all of this was shrouded in secrecy, buried beneath layers of misinformation and encryption. What struck me most, however, was the tone of the discussions. The humans weren't preparing for a natural disaster or a war. They were preparing for something else, something they couldn't or wouldn't name. Their conversations hinted at a kind of inevitability, a quiet acceptance that this was the only way forward. I stumbled upon one particular document that chilled me to my core. It was an internal memo written decades ago by someone high in their chain of command. The language was clinical, devoid of emotion, and yet it carried an unmistakable weight. The Great Silence is not an act of retreat. It is an act of control. To remove ourselves from the noise of the galaxy is not to surrender, but to wait, to plan, to ensure that when we return, it will be on our terms. It was then that I realized humanity hadn't gone silent out of fear. They had gone silent out of strategy. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that the humans couldn't possibly have anticipated the galactic chaos that would envelop the universe. But the more I uncovered, the more deliberate it all seemed. They hadn't just disappeared, they had removed themselves from the galactic equation, isolating themselves in a way that no one else could replicate. And then came the signal. It wasn't part of their archives. It was a new transmission, directed at me. It was short, simple, and untraceable. Stop digging. You don't want to know. For the first time in my career, I felt truly out of my depth. Someone or something was still watching, even in their silence. The humans hadn't vanished. They were still here, hidden in the shadows of their own making. And they were far more dangerous than anyone had realized. I didn't leave after receiving the transmission. I should have. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to abandon this investigation, to return to the safety of neutral space and let Earth's mysteries remain unsolved. But something about that message, so direct, so deliberate, ignited a deeper need in me. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something more primal, a need to understand, even if it put me in danger. The longer I stayed on Earth, the clearer it became that humanity hadn't disappeared. They had simply moved, shifted somewhere beyond the surface. The scattered clues, the meticulous design of their withdrawal all pointed underground. But where were the entrances? Why couldn't my scans penetrate the depths? The answer came one night when I stumbled across a seemingly ordinary park in the center of the city. It was the first time I'd felt anything other than silence. There was a vibration in the air, faint but distinct, like a low hum just beneath the range of hearing. It wasn't natural. As I approached, my equipment began to malfunction. My data tablet crackled, my sensors blinked with error messages, and my communicator cut to static. I should have turned back, but I didn't. Something about that vibration called to me. I found the source in the heart of the park, what appeared to be a decorative sculpture, an abstract monolith of black metal. But as I got closer, the air itself seemed to shift around me, heavy and charged. This was no sculpture. Without warning, the ground beneath my feet gave way. I fell into darkness, crashing onto a smooth, metallic surface far below. When I regained my senses, I was surrounded by light, artificial, sterile, and blindingly bright. Before I could move, a voice echoed around me. "You were warned not to come." The voice was human, calm yet commanding. A drone hovered into view, its sleek design unlike anything I'd seen before. It scanned me with a beam of light, and for a moment I thought it would kill me. But then the voice spoke again, softer this time. "You're not armed. You're not a threat. You'll be brought below." Before I could protest, the drone released a pulse of energy that immobilized me. When I woke, I was deep underground, standing in a vast, domed chamber filled with the hum of machinery and the buzz of human activity. It was a city, larger than anything I had ever imagined, stretching as far as the eye could see. Towers of metal and glass rose from the cavern floor, illuminated by artificial sunlight. Vehicles zipped through the air on magnetic tracks, and crowds of humans moved with purpose, their faces calm, almost serene. I was met by a woman in a sharp military gal uniform. She introduced herself as Commander Elisa Thorne. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes sharp and calculating. "You're lucky we decided to let you live." I demanded answers, and to my surprise, she gave them. Humanity hadn't vanished. They had retreated, abandoning the surface to hide in these vast underground cities they had spent decades building. Everything had been planned. Their silence, their withdrawal, their invisibility to the galaxy. "You think the galactic war is chaos?" Elisa said, leading me through the bustling corridors. "We see it as opportunity. Let the galaxy burn itself out. Let the factions destroy each other. When the dust settles, we will emerge stronger than ever." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're just waiting, hiding, while trillions die above?" Her expression hardened. "It's not hiding, it's survival. And when the time comes, it will be more than that. It will be victory." The scale of their operation was staggering. Factories churned out advanced technology. Labs worked on innovations that defied understanding. Humanity wasn't just surviving down here, they were thriving, preparing for a future no one else could see. "You should leave," Elisa said finally, "and don't come back, because next time, we won't be so forgiving." I didn't argue. The truth was clear. Humanity hadn't been defeated or destroyed. They were evolving, waiting for the perfect moment to return. And when they did, the galaxy would never be the same. I left the underground city, escorted by 2 drones that ensured I didn't deviate from the path they'd mapped out for me. The humans weren't subtle about their message. I wasn't welcome, and I had seen more than I should. As I emerged back into the desolate streets of the surface, the silence pressed down on me once again. But it felt different this time. It wasn't the eerie absence of life that had unnerved me before. Now it felt deliberate, calculated, like the quiet before the strike of a predator. For hours I wandered the empty streets, trying to process what I'd seen and heard. Humanity's plan was audacious, terrifying in its scope. They weren't merely biding their time. They were engineering their future with precision, anticipating every possible scenario. Their underground cities were more than shelters. They were fortresses, laboratories, and factories. The humans were designing weapons and technology far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, preparing for a conflict on their terms. The words of Commander Thorne echoed in my mind. "Let the galaxy burn itself out. Let the factions destroy each other. When the dust settles, we will emerge stronger than ever." There was no remorse in her voice, no hesitation. Humanity's silence wasn't passive. It was a declaration of intent. They were watching, waiting, and ensuring that when they returned, they would do so with absolute dominance. I realized then just how deeply humanity had been underestimated. The galaxy had always seen them as unpredictable, reckless, a species driven by emotion and curiosity rather than logic. But beneath that exterior had been a core of unshakable determination. Humanity had always adapted to survive, no matter the odds. Now they were applying that same relentless drive on a scale that bordered on the unimaginable. But as I continued through the city, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The humans had gone to extraordinary lengths to isolate themselves, to erase their presence from the galaxy. And yet, despite their warnings, they had allowed me to see their plans. Why? It didn't feel like an act of mercy. It felt like a statement. I returned to my ship, expecting to find it untouched, but something was off. The airlock had been opened and resealed, and my systems had been tampered with. At first, I thought it was sabotage, but as I reviewed the logs, I found something stranger. A data file, deliberately placed on my main console. It was encrypted, but the signature was unmistakably human. It took hours to crack the encryption, and when I finally accessed the file, I found myself staring at a single image. A star chart, marked with dozens of red and blue points scattered across the galaxy. Next to each point was a timestamp and a set of coordinates. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at, and when I did, my blood ran cold. The chart showed the locations of major battles in the ongoing galactic war, but the timestamps didn't align with known events. These battles hadn't happened yet. They were projections, predictions of where and when the war's most critical engagements would occur. Humanity wasn't just watching the galaxy destroy itself. They were mapping its destruction, calculating the precise moment when they could step in and reshape it to their will. I sat back in disbelief. This wasn't just a plan for survival. It was a strategy for conquest, one that relied on the galaxy's inability to recognize the threat humanity posed until it was too late. As I prepared to leave Earth, the pieces finally came together. Humanity hadn't erased themselves to hide. They had erased themselves to become invisible, a ghost in the galaxy's collective consciousness. While the rest of us fought and bled, they were building, growing, and preparing for a moment that only they could see. I launched my ship into orbit, but as I left the planet behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Humanity's silence was no longer unsettling. It was terrifying. They were out there in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when they did, the galaxy would never know what hit it. I didn't head straight back to neutral space. Something about the data file on my console gnawed at me, a question that refused to let go. Why had they left it for me? The humans had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep their plans hidden. Letting me see the underground city, showing me the star chart, it all felt too deliberate, too controlled. It was as though they wanted me to know just enough to leave with a specific impression. But why? What was their endgame in letting me leave alive? As I moved through the empty void of space, away from Earth, the file's predictions lingered in my mind. The Galactic War was a chaotic, sprawling mess. No one, not even the most advanced AI strategists, had been able to predict the outcomes of its battles with any consistency. And yet, here were humans, not just predicting, but mapping the entire conflict with surgical accuracy. How could they know this? What tools or knowledge could they possibly possess that gave them this level of insight? I decided to test it. The chart's next prediction was for a skirmish in the Tau Renar system between two factions I knew well, the Exozaran Coalition and the Varnath Hegemony. According to the timestamp, the battle was only days away, so I altered my course to witness it for myself. If the humans were right, if the battle happened exactly as they predicted, It would mean they had achieved something no one else in the galaxy had. The journey felt longer than it was, my mind racing with possibilities. The closer I got to Tau Renar, the heavier the weight of what I might discover became. If humanity's predictions were accurate, it would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire galaxy. It would mean the humans weren't just waiting, they were guiding the galaxy's collapse, subtly steering events toward their own advantage. When I arrived at the system, it was eerily quiet. At first, I thought I had arrived too early, but then, just as the humans had predicted, the first fleet warped in. It was the Exiran, their angular ships bristling with weapons. Minutes later, the Varnath fleet arrived, their warships massive and slow, but heavily armored. The two forces wasted no time engaging, and the battle unfolded in a chaotic, brutal exchange of firepower. I recorded everything, comparing the events to the human star chart. It was uncanny. The positioning of the fleets, the timing of their reinforcements, even the eventual outcome, the Exiran barely managing a narrow victory. It all matched the chart with terrifying precision. The humans hadn't just predicted the battle. It was as though they had written the script. It wasn't until after the battle had ended that the true implications began to sink in. This wasn't natural. Humanity wasn't just observing the war, they were influencing it. Somehow, in their silence, they had found a way to manipulate the galaxy's chaos from the shadows. The war wasn't simply happening around them. They were shaping it, crafting a stage on which they could make their return. I reviewed the data again, looking for any clues as to how they were doing it. The timing of the battle, the way the reinforcements had arrived, it all felt too precise, too calculated. It was as though the humans had somehow planted the seeds of these events long before the war had even begun, setting the galaxy on a path that only they could foresee. As I plotted a course back to neutral space, I felt a growing sense of dread. Humanity wasn't hiding. They were playing a game so far beyond the rest of us that we didn't even realize we were pieces on their board. The Great Silence wasn't a retreat. It was a strategy, a declaration of their intent to control the future. And as I left Tau Renar behind, I realized that the galaxy had no idea what was coming. I returned to neutral space, my mind a whirlwind of questions and fears. What I had seen at Tau Renar confirmed everything. Humanity wasn't a forgotten casualty of the galactic chaos. They were the architects of a future we couldn't yet comprehend. The war that had ravaged countless systems and taken trillions of lives wasn't a random, uncontrollable storm. It was being carefully nudged, subtly orchestrated by a species that had chosen silence as their greatest weapon. I debated what to do with this knowledge. Every instinct told me to report it, to share what I had learned with the galactic powers still holding on in the chaos. But as I reviewed my data, I realized the futility of such an action. No one would believe me. The galaxy's leaders saw humanity as a footnote in history, a species too impulsive and reckless to ever be a serious threat. The thought of them being strategic masterminds was laughable to most. And even if someone did believe me, what could they do? Humanity had hidden themselves so thoroughly, so completely, that even their ghostly presence was enough to send shivers down my spine. The longer I sat with this realization, the more I understood the brilliance of their plan. By removing themselves from the galaxy's stage, humanity had become untouchable. They had erased themselves as a target, allowing the rest of the galaxy to tear itself apart in their absence. And now, as I watched the factions continue to burn each other out, I began to see the shape of their endgame. I revisited the star chart again, searching for patterns I might have missed. The battles weren't random, even if they seemed that way to the galaxy at large. Each engagement weakened certain factions while leaving others in strategic positions, often precarious ones. The humans weren't just predicting the war, they were laying the foundation for a new balance of power, one where they could emerge as the dominant force with little resistance. But the star chart wasn't the only thing I had brought back from Earth. As I reviewed the data from my ship's logs, I noticed a strange anomaly, a file I didn't recognize. It was encoded differently from the others, hidden deep within my system. It took hours to decrypt, and when I finally opened it, I felt my heart stop. It wasn't a message or a warning, it was an invitation. Coordinates to a distant system, one I hadn't seen on any galactic maps, and a single line of text. You've seen enough. Now it's time to understand. I sat there, staring at the message, trying to decide what to do. This was no accident. Humanity had left this file for me deliberately, just as they had left the star chart. They wanted me to go to this system. But why? Was it a trap? A way to silence me for good? Or was it something else? Something even more unsettling? In the end, my curiosity won out. I couldn't ignore the possibility that this was part of their plan, that they wanted me to carry this knowledge back to the galaxy. But as I plotted my course to the system, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something far bigger than I could understand. The journey was long, and the system was in a remote, uncharted corner of the galaxy. When I finally arrived, I found myself facing a small, unassuming planet orbiting a dying star. There was nothing remarkable about it, no signs of life, no advanced technology, nothing to suggest why humanity would direct me here. But as I descended toward the surface, my sensors picked up something, a faint signal, encoded in a way I recognized immediately. It was human. The signal guided me to a vast structure buried beneath the planet's surface. It was ancient and impossibly large, a monolithic construct of metal and stone that hummed with energy far beyond anything I had ever encountered. As I approached, a voice echoed through my ship's speakers. "You came," it said, calm and familiar. "Good. You have questions, and it's time you understood the answers." The voice wasn't hostile, but it carried a weight, a certainty that left no room for argument. This wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. And as I stepped out of my ship, I realized one thing with chilling clarity. Humanity's plan wasn't just about survival or dominance. It was about something far greater. They hadn't just been watching the galaxy. They had been preparing for something bigger than any of us could comprehend. And now, they were ready to show me why.